afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of the Stargate Universe Sci-Fi Cult Classics franchise documentary. I'm delighted this evening to be joined by the one and only Garwin Sandford, who played the role of Narim in Stargate SG1 and also played the role of Simon Wallace, the husband of Elizabeth Weir in Stargate Atlantis. I suppose, Garwin, you've been heavily and sort of involved in the Stargate sort of universe since its inception after the movie, after the blockbuster movie featuring sort of Kirk Douglas and James Spader back in 1995. Well, in terms of getting involved in Stargate SG1, did you try out for some of the main roles or the lead roles at that time when it was in Vancouver, or was it the later on when the opportunities came about for you in terms of a recurring role?
Yeah, it's interesting about Nareem specifically. Um, I I've only done 3 episodes in the whole series, right? But it feels like the character's been responded to as if it was a much larger character in the show. Um, I was literally in Cape Town shooting a show, and my agent phoned and said that they'd offered me a role in Stargate, and of course that was its first season. And I didn't know anything about the show really. I knew what it was because I'd seen the movie, which I really enjoyed, and I knew they were making the series in Vancouver. So it was a pleasant surprise. I had no idea who the character was. I hadn't read for it. I didn't know anything about it. And I was flying back after finished filming in Cape Town. I was flying back to Vancouver, and they wanted me to start filming the very next day.
Yeah.
So I would have had to go in the morning and get my wardrobe done up, and they would organize stuff. And then the following day, I would start filming. So I had one day literally in between to get ready. So I asked if they could send me the script, but then of course I was flying out in a few days. It would never arrive to me in Cape Town. So I got home and got a script like literally the night I arrived, and spent the next day doing wardrobe and trying to get off book on my lines for the next day's filming. So I had no idea what the character was going to be, or so there was no prep time other than just jump in, right? So I read it. I had some ideas about what I wanted to do with him to make him, as we know, Nareem was a bit of a milk toast, very, very gentle and proper individual, like extremely so. So when we did it, Tobin Bell was playing Omok. So the two of us kind of got together and talked about what kind of protocols, how they would be. I talked to William Garrity was directing, and we talked about how Narim would speak. And what we ended up him, I said, I don't want it to be like an alien, the cliche of him not doing contractions, but I wanted him to speak very formally, because they were let's make them very respectful, because that seemed to be how it was written. Very, very formal, very stiff, very reserved. So that's how we just went with it on the first day. The three of us talked and we went, okay, let's do it. The fun of that is that we were actually creating that Tolan world. We were the ones that were responsible for kind of shepherding forth what it ended up being, how they were with people. So that was a lot of fun.
Gareth, that's sort of an interesting story in terms of getting the opportunity on the spot, coming from South Africa, getting the plane all to Vancouver. Did your agent know at that time? Obviously, were the few episodes in? Did they know Richard Dean Anderson was on the show? Michael Shanks, Christopher Judge, had you all that knowledge coming with you before you got off the plane in Vancouver? Who was the main cast?
Oh, I knew that Amanda Tapping was going to be I was to be a somewhat of a love interest for Amanda, for her character, Samantha. I didn't know, I knew Christopher Judge was on it, and Christopher and I had worked together, Chris and I worked together on a show called Booker years before. And I had a recurring role in that. And so I believe Chris did as well. So we got thrown together back in those days. So I knew Chris was involved. And I'd done 2 episodes of MacGyver with Richard. So I knew that Ricky Dean was involved. So I knew the people, right? Most of them at the time. I didn't know Michael Shanks at that point. So I didn't know the premise. I just knew that that's what I was headed for. I knew who I was working with. And I knew Michael Green, was it Greenberg? Michael Green? Oh, that's horrible. I can't remember his last name at the moment. Don't put that in.
No problem. No problem.
Anyway, the producers I had worked with before as well. So
And in terms of
that's how that all came.
And in terms of Garwin arriving on set, in terms of Stargate SG1, in terms of the sets itself, the production, the detail that went in to all the sets, from this metal Stargate, from the worlds that was sort of created, sort of special effects, were you sort of taken back by the sheer scale, the sheer enormity of the sort of project? Did it almost feel like that you were walking on an alien world as such?
Well, the first episode we did, we were rescued from an alien world and then taken. That was alien for the SG1 people, but for us, it was home. Our planet was destroying itself, and then they took us to an alien world. But the sets themselves, I mean, were spectacular. They really were really complete. You'd walk in, and they were completely, four walled. Right? Didn't have ceilings because that's where the lights were, and stuff like this. But basically, it was, the Stargate itself. They were very impressive sets, so it made it easy to step into. There's no doubt. The costuming. My first costume was basically a silver jumpsuit, uh, which was zippered up the back, and all. And it actually was like Star Trek. The cast had first complained those jumpsuits, they stretch and then they pull down on your neck all night, all day long. So by the time I had finished that episode, my back was sore just from this stretching down all the time. So just like in Star Trek, when they asked me to come back and do a second episode, I said, great, but I need a different costume. I can't wear that jumpsuit again. But again, all the little toys they gave us, the wrist things that we wore that walked through walls, and we had all the toys and saw all the toys. So it was very spectacular. I mean, the detail was incredible. And the testament is that 24 years later, I'm still being interviewed by people, right, for a relatively small, a 3-episode part in a show that has captured the imagination of generations of people and has continued to inspire conventions and artwork and interest in the show a quarter of a century later. So that detail, I think, is one of the reasons why it continues to this day.
And I suppose, Garwin, you mentioned that your character's appeal, and I suppose for most people, when they look at sort of characters in SG1, they sort of compare what was when they think of them. When they think of Michael Shanks, they think of he's the Batar Hashan who played Charé, or the Monette de Gould. When they think of Richard Dean Anderson, they think of
Right.
maybe that wife in his planet. So when they think of Amanda Tapping, when Amanda Tapping springs to mind, you naturally come straight away. You're the sort of first thought in terms of what that was about herself.
Right.
So in terms of that sort of link between yourself and Amanda, that sort of connection that
Yes.
you created on show, it means that your character really sort of stood out in terms of when people 6 or 7 seasons in, they probably still remember Narim, with this sort of associate him hand in hand with
Right.
Samantha Carter.
Yeah, and it's why I know that's one of the main reason why my character continues to resonate, is because I was attached to one of the most amazing actors on the show. It was, and almost all my scenes were with her until we did Between Two Fires, and then in that episode, that was fun because it was one of the larger guest stars they'd ever done. They told me this. The producer said, well, this is probably the largest guest star part we've written for the series up to this point, because normally it's the team and the guest stars just fit in. But because it was on Talana, and we were going to be having all of this stuff with Narim have to give off and save the worlds by not letting them have the technology of I believe it was the ion cannons and something else. They didn't want that technology to be able to phase through walls and phase through into a planet to go through Stargate. So he made the choice to let his planet die, literally, in return. So he got to step up somewhat. So there was a nice arc for that character. Where he carried through. But up until then, it felt like Narim's whole reason for being at this point was that he was falling in love and had fallen in love with Amanda. I read something recently which made me laugh and thought about it. It's actually true. it was the question was, is Narim a romantic character or is he just a creepy stalker? Because they said, like they go to his place and the computer has her voice. When they go to his house, the computer starts to speak in the house and it has Amanda's voice. And she's going, is that my voice? I guess, oh, I didn't think you'd notice. But all of a sudden we start, and so you start looking at it, and I thought in retrospect, it could be kind of creepy, and it is. So there's two sides to Narim. That there's fans who think he's a romantic interest guy and quite sweet, and the other was going, no, he's a creepy stalker guy. So I thought that was fun. It was a whole new take on my character, and I looked at it, and actually there are points to be made in support of that creepy stalker one. So.
I thought you still have a bit of Amanda Tapping's hair, the pieces of her hair, so somewhere.
Well, that yes, I stole her DNA too. It's in a jar in Narim's house.
Garwin, I suppose you mentioned there having a sort of recurring sort of a role in Stargate, and is that in terms of your time appearances, the same directors being involved in Stargate Atlantis as they were in Stargate SG1 that you came to mind in terms of creating a sort of another sort of love interest, this time for Elizabeth Weir, the head of Stargate Atlantis?
Yeah, that I believe the producers, when they thought of someone to match up for Elizabeth Weir, they thought of, well, actually me. They phoned up and said we'd like to, and again they offered me the role, which was really nice. And I said, absolutely, I'd love to. I loved working with them the first time, and it's a whole new show. But it turns out it's in the same universe. And you had mentioned that I was her husband, and that's what I thought I'd been hired to do originally, was her husband. And but they switched that after they began to realize, I think, two things. One, there was a large number of the fans who were a little kind of upset that said, wait a minute, it's the same universe. They didn't even bother to make him look different. He's like Narim. He's not Simon Wallace. What the heck is going on here? Right? So there was stuff appearing on the websites and online going, what? They had a problem with it. The second one was, I think they realized they would paint themselves into a bit of a corner as a part for Weir's character, is that her husband is on Earth and she can't return. So relationship wise and storytelling wise, I think they realized that became a bit of a problem. So I only did 3 episodes of that as well. The second episode was where they're dying and the aliens give them their wish in their minds so they can die with happy. So Elizabeth came home. So we visit, right? And there's this lovely home type situation scenes, and we hugging, we kiss, and it's really nice. And then the next episode I do, turns out that I'm her boyfriend. So they had to kind of shift things a bit. So I'm her boyfriend, and then she'd gone so long, I just said, well, I fell in love with somebody else, bye-bye. So I basically, so they killed, and then they ended up, which was very funny. There's a line in one of the shows, and I don't know if it ended up in the show or not, I'd heard about it, is that she's looking at a newspaper and there's a story about me dying in a car crash.
Okay.
So that's how they kind of got rid of that character. But I think that because they liked my work and I enjoyed working with them, and I, that it was a thought that they said, oh, this is great. And then afterwards, I think because of the fan reaction to the fact that I was still Narim in their minds, that it, and the fact that it causes issues for storytelling, they just went, let's figure it out. And they kind of just had me go south.
And you mentioned a good point, Garwin, there about the people being able to identify characters in the same sort of universe and their faces sort of exposed. Do you think maybe if they had done a bit of cosmetics in terms of your facial sort of appearance, that Simon could have been around for a bit longer, a bit of maybe a bit of bleach in the hair or some sort of thing, or
I think mostly if I was going to be on Earth and not on the other planet, if I was the boyfriend or husband or someone that was completely with her physically, I think it would have caused issue with storytelling. I think it would have she'd have no love interests on the other planets, or it would cast that character in a less than favorable light if she was cheating on her guy from back in Earth, right? So I don't think it would have changed in the long run. I think they realized that having the boyfriend slash husband on Earth caused problems storytelling wise. That was just my opinion. I never asked them about it.
And I suppose, Garwin, playing a role in Stargate SG1 and I suppose Stargate Atlantis, when Stargate Universe came on the horizon, had you enough of Stargate at that sort of stage, or were you aware of it? I suppose that was really sort of a different sort of take. It was more a Battlestar Galactica type sort of take on the whole Stargate sort of environment. Were you sort of aware of that project, or had they made any rumblings to you about that time, or because you had appeared in sort of 2 series, I suppose it would have been a different take to try and
Oh, you mean for working on Battlestar?
working on Stargate Universe?
Oh, Universe. Oh, no, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they talked to me about playing. They had talked about me doing a character of the father of one of the characters, and they would visit me in flashbacks. But at that time, I thought, with my experience with Atlantis, and I kept thinking, well, am I going to be accepted as another character in another, even though it may be separate again? So I just said, well, and I didn't really see the character. There was much room for the character to go anywhere. There's no real arc for the character that they had talked about, the father. And it turned out, I think that character was whoever played it was in 1 episode. So it seemed to me that at the time I went, the character hadn't really interested me very much. Right. So I just didn't.
Yeah. And Garwin, I suppose lastly, before I let you go, and it's probably one of the questions before I finish up all these sort of interviews, let's pretend your character Narim was put in a Stargate sort of dictionary, an encyclopedia as such, and they left 2 blank sentences underneath it. And they asked you, Garwin Sandford, having played the role of Narim, to write those 2 sentences to sum him up. What would you like those 2 sentences to read?
That might may take more than a 30-second thought, but what would it be? I guess that Narim was a man of principle and a man of integrity, and was willing to give up his life in return for in return for doing the right thing. Whereas, the people in the Tolanian Curia were willing to sell out to the Goa'uld to protect themselves. He wasn't willing to do so. And that he was known for the fact that he loved Amanda's character. He was, his love for Samantha Carter was the light in his life.
I said just above that sort of wall. It's sort of giving away. It's sort of, you're still hiding them up there somewhere, Garwin. Garwin, an absolute pleasure talking to you today, to relive your memories of your time on Stargate SG1 playing Narim, and also on Stargate Atlantis playing the role of Simon Wallace. And a big sort of player as such, the character resonated in terms of the Stargate universe. It still holds its worth today. People are still sort of talking about him. I suppose that's the power of the character and the power of the acting as well. And Garwin Sandford, a pleasure talking to you, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and we hope to see you back on our screens when all this pandemic is over in 2021.
Yeah, me too. There is one thing I'd like to add. They did tell me at the 100th party, they had it originally intended for Narim to come back as a Goa'uld. He was going to show up, right? And in the cartoon or the comic books or the stories, someone told me this later, that in the stories they've written since, I can't remember if it's the cartoon series or there's a series of stories and books that have continued to be written. And I believe it's Zapakna's in me.
Okay.
So So that would have been fun. I really talk about a good arc for that character. You want to leave just on that type of a note. To come back as a gold would have been icing on the cake. But anyway, thank you so much.
No problem, Garwin. Garwin, take care. Pleasure, mate, and hopefully speak sometime again in the future.
Pleasure to meet you. Take care. Be safe.